Hello, everyone, and welcome to the launch party for The Last Dance of the Debutante by Julia Kelly. I'm not Julia Kelly, obviously. I'm actually her little sister, but I'm here to put her in the hot seat and have her tell us more about her book. So if you guys want to ask any questions throughout the event, go ahead and type them in into the chat below, and we'll go ahead and get to them. So Julia, happy release day.
Hey, thank you so much. Well, first of all, I'm going to tease you just a little bit
Oh
because
no.
I think you haven't told the people what your name is.
I knew I would forget to do that. I knew I would. My name's Justine.
And you are a book blogger, reviewer, booktuber, book talker in your own right as well. And your handle is I should read that, right?
Yes, so I have kind of decided that I've taken over the bookish internet, mostly for science fiction and fantasy, but I'm also a big historical fiction reader as well. So
Yes, we get it from the same place, which is our mother and father. So
exactly.
well, so thank you so much for agreeing to come on and do this. We've been joking about you interviewing me at some point for a long time. And I think a couple months ago, I just messaged you on the side and said, so like, do you actually want to do that? It's really fun.
Yes,
So,
yes.
so we thought the last dance of the debutante would be the right time to do it. And I just got the beautiful finished copies. You have an early reader copy, but I actually just got these today on launch day because of all the holiday shenanigans. So this is the book, and I'm very excited. This is the US edition of it. And I'm really curious to see what the hot seat's going to be like when my baby sister is in charge.
All the difficult questions here.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Absolute grilling. So the first most difficult question, why don't you tell us a little bit about your book?
So that actually is a legitimately difficult question. I think a lot of authors really struggle with it because how do you summarize this book that you've spent all this time working on and writing and all of that, and then put it into a couple of sentences? So I've never been known for my brevity, but I'm going to try.
Me too, it's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. It's a family trait. So The Last Dance of the Debutante is a historical novel. It's set in 1958. And the reason it's set in 1958 is that is the last year that Queen Elizabeth II received debutantes at court for what were called presentation parties. So if you think of sort of like Bridgerton or The Crown, or even I think there was a presentation in Downton Abbey as well, this is where debutantes would be presented and brought out into society and essentially be put on the marriage market, especially back in sort of the Edwardian Victorian era. So this is the last year that that's done. And Lily, who is the main character of this book, is a young woman who is sort of at a really pivotal point in her life. She's 18. She's left school. She's actually been pulled out of school in order to essentially train to be a debutante. And she's also has a sense that there may be a little bit more to life than the traditions that her family wants her to follow. So it's important to her mother and her grandmother that she become a debutante, but she also has this interest in English literature, which is something that I maybe modeled on you a little bit. I know that's what your degree is in. And so she is at this crossroads, and it's really a coming of age story while also looking at class and the social structure, because she meets a bunch of different people, in particular, two very different debutantes who kind of represent the two directions that society is moving in. And then, of course, there's a big family secret at the middle of it also, because I love a family secret. Although our family is really boring for family secrets.
No, it's terrible. Actually, it's not terrible, but
no, it's a good thing, especially considering some of the things that I write about.
Yeah.
But it sort of all of that really forces her to make some really big decisions about what she wants her life to look like and what what path she's going to go down after the season is done.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because a lot of your historical fiction so far has been set in sort of a fairly specific period of time, which is, of course,
Very
World War II.
Yes.
And this is not World War II.
No, it's definitely not. So it's although having spoken to our mother a lot about the war, she wasn't born during the war. She doesn't remember it, but she remembers growing up in a society that was very much colored by that. And so, she remembers people referring to it was this event, right? It was before the war or after the war. That's how you categorize things. So she's very much a child of after the war, after austerity has been lifted, and rationing is over. So it's an interesting time in Britain.
Mhm.
But it's not exactly what people will expect from me from the books behind me, The Last Garden in England and The Light Over London and The Whispers of War. I decided to explore a slightly different time period.
And where did you get the idea to kind of move into that different time period from?
Well, speaking of our mother,
I knew mom would have some kind of hand in this.
yeah, she definitely did, and in a really, really good way, as she often does. So our mother and our father are both great readers, and I was taking mom out to tea with a couple of my friends in London. We were doing sort of like a mother-daughter thing because we thought our mothers would all get along really well. And we did a little bit of book shopping beforehand at Hatchards, one of your favorite bookstores as
Oh,
well.
yes.
And we were early, so we decided we would go ahead and take our books and have a cup of coffee before we had our tea. And she just started talking to me about this book that she had won in a raffle, I think. They went up
Oh,
to, yeah, do you remember when they went up to
Wigtown, right?
Wigtown,
Yeah.
and this is a place that's famous for having like something crazy like 24 bookstores in this small English town, and somebody was doing a giveaway of books that they enjoyed because one of the bookstores in Wigtown is actually an Airbnb where you can come and you can run the bookstore for a week, I believe it is.
I want to go so badly, but we literally checked last time I was with mom and dad. It's a 2-year wait list.
I'm not surprised, right? Because a book nerd hears about this, they're like, "Oh, that sounds great!" Because you get to sell what you want to sell, and you get to, open the shop whenever you want to open it. And this person, I believe it was two women from London, had come up, and one of them put together a raffle of books that she loved. So Mum won this book, which is called The Last Curtsy, The End of the Debutantes by Fiona McCarthy. And Fiona McCarthy was a really eminent biographer in Britain. She wrote sort of the definitive history of William Morris and some other very significant figures, but she was actually one of the last debutantes. And so
Oh,
Mum
really?
was telling me about this book and was saying, it just sounds fascinating, and it's such a turning point in history, right before the swinging 60s, right before the second wave feminist movement. You have a lot of cultural change coming. And I, as an author, love those moments of cultural change because it really forces your characters often into moments of pressure, which creates interesting narratives and interesting decisions. So I'm sitting there just thinking to myself, how can I get this book as quickly as possible? And so sure enough, she handed it off to me. I read it and I just thought, this is great. And so I pitched an idea based around the 1958 season.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting that you talk about big moments of social change. Obviously, you wrote a lot about World War II.
Yes.
It's a fairly big moment for change. But it's so funny. We were actually talking about this earlier. I gave you a call earlier in the day. And there's a particular moment in the book that I feel there's a few of these. But there's one particular moment where a group of devs are getting ready, and it's this thing that feels quite old-fashioned as you sort of think of that time being, but they're blasting Little Richard and they're listening to Little Richard.
Yeah, yeah, rock and roll music, because that was coming over from America, and it's not a Victorian novel. They would have been listening to their records and hanging out and going out, sneaking out, dancing, and all sorts of stuff. Watching television, if they had a television in the house.
It's so strange to think of those two things converging in one time period. But it makes a lot of sense when you actually sit down and think about what they were doing. But you also talk about, sort of speaking of the older fashion feeling, you talk about the clothes, for example, that some of the girls are maybe forced to wear by their former debutante grandmothers, or some of the strange traditions that are involved in the season. So what was that kind of research like, and what are some of the fun things that you found out?
Well, I'm wearing my debutante white, although this is not a debutante dress by any means. But I think one of the things that's really interesting, at least coming from the United States, my association with debutantes is that they, wear white. They're presented at cotillions. There's, essentially a coming out ball, because that's the experience that I saw in the community that we grew up in. And I've had a few women, the title is The Last Dance of the Debutante, and I've had a few women kind of cheekily say, well, actually, in my community, we still have debutantes. So So basically what I'm talking about here is the last season of debutantes in London, official debutantes who are presented. And when it comes to doing the research for that, first of all, that book by Fiona McCarthy was hugely helpful.
Mhm.
But there was a structure that had been followed for decades, centuries, of what the season looked like. So you had the presentation parties in March, which I was able to do some research around that, related to, for instance, the court circular in the Times in London, still published today. But my debutante was presented on a certain day, and I was able to go to the next day's newspaper and see, what was the band that was playing at the reception, who was actually at the presentation. So Princess Margaret was there, as well as the Duke of Edinburgh and the Queen. So I was able to put little details in about that. But then, of course, you have kind of a structure that the season follows, and there are certain significant events. So Royal Ascot being one, Henley being one, but then also my favorite, Queen Charlotte's Ball, which is
Yes.
mad that you can get YouTube videos of. And
Seriously.
if anybody's interested, I've posted a couple times on Facebook, but I'll post it again. You have a newsreel, essentially. I think it's British Pathé, highlighting these girls. So all the girls dress in white, which was not always the case at debutante balls, but for this particular event, everybody dressed in white floor-length gowns, and 150, I believe it was, debutantes were selected to be quote unquote handmaidens. And so what they would do is there was a dinner and they'd disappear upstairs, and then they descend down this big staircase, and then they all come out to the middle of this floor of a event hall, basically, that used to be an ice skating rink. So it was massive. And they line up, and there's this sort of like choreographed thing that they do, and a big cake, like a huge cake taller than me, is rolled out, and they all curtsy to the cake, because the cake is meant to represent Queen Charlotte, who was sort of the originator of a lot of the debutante traditions. She was the one who began holding court and holding debutante presentations at court. So they bow to the cake, and then an honorary stand-in for Queen Charlotte, who is usually a highly a very titled aristocratic woman, with her jewels on and her tiara, would go ahead and cut the cake with a sword, and then the debutante would serve the cake. And it's mad. If you sit there and watch this thing, it's fascinating. But it was a real hallmark of the season. So getting access to things like YouTube videos, fashion magazines, even interviews with debutantes themselves were really invaluable. And I know I have a tendency to go on and on, but just one more thing. The fashion magazines and the society gossip magazines were really important. So this is the Tatler and Sketch, which were really like the two dominant ones that I found in my research. And Sketch shows up quite a lot in the book. And they covered all aspects of society, including, fashion and travel and sort of high society. But one of the things they did was actually, this is the Tatler, they published some of the debutantes' portraits. And so these would be studio portraits, which appear in the book. And in this case, this is titled The Last Presentations. So little bits and pieces like this, and just sort of how they talked about the girls and how the girls looked in their studio portraits, really, really interesting. And some of them look quite youthful and modern, and some you can tell that sort of the hair and the makeup and the style is still much more conservative, much more, to my eyes at least, old-fashioned. And when you think of just a few years later with the youthful swinging 60s look. So it was fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. Well, again, kind of going back to that sort of balance of old versus new in this big social change, we have Lily, who I love.
Yes, that's our main character, who you liked in particular from what you've told me.
Yes, definitely. How does she kind of embody that change, and how did you make, because I feel like it would be very easy to either make her super conservative and be really into being a debutante during the season, or super kind of liberal and absolutely not wanting to do this at all, and it's totally ridiculous and all of this is horrible. But she's not either of those things. She's somewhere in the middle. What made you make those decisions, and how did you kind of frame her character?
Well, I think one of the things that's always interested me are coming of age stories. So stories about women at points of transition in their lives. And that's what a coming of age story is, right? So I think with her, she's a really intelligent girl, and she has a real interest in English and a real interest in her education. And it's really painful to her when she's pulled out of school to be sent to finishing school. It's not an exciting thing, but it's a thing that she sort of accepts for various reasons, part of which is that her grandmother holds the purse strings for the family. It's something that she accepts she's going to have to do. But I think as she becomes more exposed to the world and she meets more people, even within this very closed environment of the elite who would have had their daughters presented or had the money to pay to have their daughters presented, and we can talk a little bit about that in a moment. Even within that world, her eyes start to be open to different people with different motivations and different things that they want. So I think she's a little bit of a character who hasn't figured herself out yet, especially at the beginning of the book. And of course, by the end, I hope people feel like Lily has made a decision about what her life is going to be like. But she has these two people on either side of her. Yeah. One is a woman named Liana, and Liana is sort of very much represents the traditional debutante. She is a contender for what would have been called the Deb of the Year, which is sort of all the society magazines deciding like who's the top Deb. And this was a real thing, which sounds horrid to me. But
it sounds very high school.
It does say it's a little bit like prom. Yeah, except I'm not entirely sure what the criteria is for becoming Deb of the Year. But even having done the research, it seems very ephemeral, these things. But with Leanna, she is really, she has always expected to be presented. She really expects to do well in the season. She's popular because she is from a wealthy family who has all of the background and the breeding that would be sort of synonymous with being a debutante. And then on the other side, Lily meets Catherine, whose nickname is the Millionaire Debutante, who I think you really like. So Catherine is the daughter of a very wealthy man, but he's a self-made man. So the money is very new. She has an American mother who in her own right comes from a well-off family. They own department stores in America, but she's American and she's crass, and people think that she is social climbing. But what they want more than anything else is their daughter to be a debutante, because that is traditionally the entree for a lot of families into society. It's not the generation that necessarily made the money, it's the next generation that they put into the right schools, that they introduce to the right people through being a debutante, and eventually they hope marry into a well-off family. And this is a tradition that's happened throughout the upper class, certainly from Georgian and Victorian times. You see it in Jane Austen, you see it in all sorts of books across English literature especially, and all sorts of romance novels too.
Definitely.
And so you have Catherine, who is a dutiful daughter. She wants her family to be happy. She knows this is important to her parents, but what she really wants is to get through the season and become a journalist, because, hey, who knew, being exposed to newsrooms and hanging out in her dad's world, because he's the publisher of newspapers, means that she's become really attracted to the idea of being one of these people. And so she is really on a different track than a lot of the other debutantes. And so Lily is sort of caught in the middle of the two of these groups of people, and we're trying to figure out which way is Lily going to go, what does she really want. And then of course things become even more complicated when Lily learns something very devastating and difficult about her own family. And I'm being very careful about what I say.
The aforementioned family secrets.
The aforementioned family secrets. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Well, it's interesting because this is absolutely a sort of setting and sort of time period that would lend itself very, very well to sort of female friendships. And there's tons of women in this book, obviously. But the sort of dichotomy of Leanne, who's not the nicest person in the world. She's one of those people who's very, I think, very toxic, and that she can make you feel like you're the only person in the world, but then in an instant turn her back on you. And then you have Catherine, who's not the right type of person, as everyone keeps telling her, but she really likes Catherine because she's a good person and she's her friend. Was writing that hard, and was it quite fun actually?
Yeah, it was both of those things. I think with a character like Liana, she really is a frenemies type of character.
Mm,
And I think it can be very, very easy to go in and just make her the worst person in the world. But I wanted her to be a bit more subtle than that. I wanted her
mm,
to be a person who is kind of at her core, I think, is a bit sad and a bit insecure.
mhm,
And that comes out in ways. And I think she is one of those people who I've met, I think all of us have met at some point in our lives, where you sit there and you think to yourself, you're managing your friends, you're pushing people in ways that work best for you. You're difficult because you always want your own way,
mhm,
and you don't really feel comfortable sitting back and trusting that people will just be your friend on
mhm,
this because you're a good person. And I think that I have a lot of sympathy for her in a way
mhm.
that I hope comes through in some ways in the book, but I
It
also wouldn't,
does, yeah.
excuse her sometimes very bad behavior. And with Catherine, I think, she one of the things that I wanted to emphasize is she's not a golden girl. She has moments where she doesn't want to be the center of attention. Like, it's not just that she doesn't really, the debutante thing isn't really her thing. She doesn't like people standing around looking at her. She doesn't like people talking about her and her family behind her back. So she has to kind of decide what's the most important thing to her. And ultimately she does care about her parents very deeply. And even if she doesn't want the same things as her parents, she needs to sort of decide what's important to her and what's not important to her.
Mhm. Well, watching them move through the various, I honestly, I'm going to be completely honest. It sounds like hell. It's
It's
very
not
easy
your
to think.
idea of a good time.
Oh my God. It sounds sort of, when you talk about like the cocktail parties and the balls and the dresses and all of that, like it's super, flippant and glam and all of that. But watching these women, especially all of them having different reactions to what's going on around them, how they feel about the season and everything, and what's expected of them, watching them move through all of these events, it's as Lily says constantly, it's a marathon, not a sprint, and it sounds hard.
Well, it sounds so funny when I've talked to people about this. I get two reactions. I get one group of people that thinks that sounds fab. That sounds wonderful. Like, give me the dresses and the parties. It's basically a full-time job. So
Yeah.
I'll do that. That's great. And the others go, oh God, no, no, not in a million years.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the things that I wanted to emphasize is there was a lot of glamour and a lot of excitement. And going to some of these balls must have been incredible. But the season was also a marathon. Like you said, you would be presented in March, and then you would have, before March, you would have maybe gone to finishing school, but you certainly would be going to all these luncheons and teas with other debutantes in order to bring your address book, and literally write down their addresses as you meet them so that you could invite them to your cocktail party or coming out ball or both. And
Mhm.
then they could invite you to theirs. And even better, if you had brothers or cousins that were unattached,
You're
great,
set.
because yeah, they want you to come so that you bring them so that they're men to dance with the girls at the
Yeah.
parties. So, so you had those. So that was a marathon in and of itself. And
Mhm.
then you have the cocktail parties, which really go from sort of mid to late March after the presentations through to the end of May. And you could have 2 or 3 cocktail parties in a night. They were often held in very similar places. So if you weren't having it at your home or a home of a relative or very, very good family friend, you would probably be at somewhere like the Savoy or one of the clubs, and the Hyde Park Hotel comes up over and over and over
Mhm.
about the research. So there were places that were typical. So you could be going to the same place 4 times in a week, and you could be going to multiple parties in a night. I mean, it sounds exhausting. So your night would sort
Yeah.
of off at 6 p.m. and could go on and on and on. And
Oof.
that's just the cocktail parties, because then you get to the big stuff, which kicks off with Queen Charlotte's Ball,
Mhm.
officially, traditionally the first ball of the season. And then you get all the London balls, and that's May and June. And then into sort of June to July, you get the country balls, and those are the ones outside. And you would try to schedule so that maybe you had like a ball in Surrey on Saturday and a ball in Surrey on Sunday. So you could stay within the same county, but you'd be running around the countryside. And then if you went to Dublin for the Dublin Horse Show, that was a compressed period of time, about a week, where you would be doing all the Irish balls. So that's where you go. If you had Irish friends who were inviting you, you do the stuff at their place. And then you come back, and in September, you're doing the balls up in Scotland. And those actually sound like a lot of fun, because I do love Scottish country dancing, and that would get mixed in. But that would be exhausting in and of itself. And then if you're really, really hardcore, you would be going and doing the little season in October, November, which is more parties in London, although much more subdued than the full-on season. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, you have the boat race, Henley, Ascot, all these different events that were also on the social calendar that made up the season. It sounds exhausting.
I'm tired just thinking about it, honestly.
And then if you're not an extrovert, can you imagine spending that much social time? I spoke to a couple of debutantes who essentially said you found a couple of friends and you stuck with them, and you just sometimes made it through, because that's what you had to do in order to make this entire season work for you and not get burned out straight away.
Yeah. Well, how difficult was it to, or maybe not difficult, but was it challenging at all to have, as you say, all these cocktail party after cocktail party after cocktail party, sometimes in the same place? You have all these characters in the exact same spot, and you want a little variety. You want to kind of balance things out. Was that hard?
Yeah, so the first draft I wrote, I don't think anybody really moved from the Hyde Park Hotel.
They just sprawled out on sofas.
Right, they just lived there. So I did realize, one of the notes I got back from my editor was, could we move them around a little bit more? And so I did a couple of things, and if people have read the book, they'll recognize, I send them to a photographer's studio to have those studio portraits done. I send them to, at one point they go to a coffee shop in Soho, which was very like, coffee bars were a real sort of trendy thing. Our aunt and uncle actually met at a coffee bar. That was their first.
Really?
Yep, I'll tell you more offline.
Oh, please do.
It was a coffee bar in Liverpool, but
oh well, yeah.
And then I sent them to a Wimpy, Lion's Corner House, the Wimpy Bar, which is a burger joint, and just to get them out of that world a little bit, and also make sure that I wanted to give the reader the sense that there's a lot of repetition, there's a lot of exhaustion, there's a lot of all of that, but I also wanted to give a wider sense of London as well, within what these girls would have necessarily done and been to. So they go to some nightclubs, they go to some restaurants, things like that. But yeah, they needed to get out of the confines of the Hyde Park Hotel for a while.
There's something about sort of like the little Richard moment where they're all getting ready for the ball. There's something about the two of them going to the burger bar that was just, it's another one of those moments that kind of jostles you and is like, wait, these things existed at the same time.
It's a funny thing too, because this is not a YA novel. It's not a young adult novel, but we're dealing with people who are 18, 19, 20 years old. And I think sometimes by nature of what they're doing, it's appropriate for them to feel more mature than what we would think of their age being. But sometimes it's also, I think, important to remember that these are young people who are trying to figure out the world, and same with their escorts also, the Deb's delights, the men who danced them around and took them to dinner and things like that. So yeah, I liked sprinkling little bits and pieces in there. And actually it's funny, your husband mentioned that he remembered wimpy bars, which don't exist anymore in the UK. I think they are in South Africa, the brand that survived, but he remembers, the logos and the branding and all of that stuff.
That's funny. Yeah. Well, with them being young people, they do get up to some antics.
Of course.
Hilarious. There's one bit, it's a small aside, but there's a bit where they like bust into a tennis court and play a game of tennis, like in their big froofy dresses, which I thought was just great. There's a particular scene that I love, because I feel like many of us can probably at some point in our lives relate, which is the hangover scene.
So early in the book, so it's not a spoiler.
Okay, yeah. There's a hangover scene, which is hilarious because like I felt that in my soul. I don't drink anymore, but like I felt that. I felt that deep inside of me. So is there anything that you found through your research, or that you kind of like threw in from your own life or from the research that you did? You said you talked to some of the actual debutantes. Maybe you stole a hangover scene from some of my past experiences. Was there anything
I
like
think
that?
that's a very universal experience. I think
That's true. Yeah, I did feel a little like, have I told her too much?
possible. Yeah, so what's funny you mentioned that. So there are kind of two things. There are little bits and pieces that you get from research. So for instance, I watched a documentary made with a lot of the last season of Debutantes speaking in, I believe it was the 90s or the early 2000s, about their experience. And it was a BBC documentary. It's available pretty widely. And one of the women mentions the fact that her mother used to, because these girls were out unchaperoned.
Yeah, which seemed wild to me, but
right.
again,
Well, that's how much society had changed, really, from maybe the First World War to 1958. But one of the girls, her mother made her put her shoes inside her mother's bedroom door when she got home. So the idea being that she would know that she had made it home, and kind of, she could wake up in the middle of the night and see whether her daughter had put her shoes there. But if your mother's a heavy sleeper, that's not really going to do much.
yeah.
So yeah, there was a lot of getting up to antics, going to nightclubs and things like that. But in every book, and you and I were talking a bit about this earlier today, in every book I try to weave in something that's an in joke that will make the family laugh, or my friend laugh, that nobody else is going to understand. It's a true Easter egg. And we couldn't remember what they were in this book.
There was a really, really good one, and I was reading it yesterday without my phone, and I was like, I have to mention that to Julia, and I have completely forgotten what it was.
So
it was really funny though.
And they're so little that nobody would really know, except I can tell you one of the ones actually for the next book that will come out from me, the book that I've just finished writing and have handed in for edits. It's the first draft is done. I write about a Blenheim bomber. I'm back in World War II. So I write about a crew on a Blenheim bomber, and all the last names are from a movie that I really love. And it's just in passing. You don't even meet these characters. They're just mentioned on a radio. And so that I put in because I knew it would make my partner and you guys smile. And then also there are a couple of mentions of both house construction and dogs' behavior that are very true to our family in The Last Garden in England. So little bits and pieces, again, that nobody else would know, but you guys would get, and it makes me happy.
Yeah, it makes us laugh when we get to them. It means that we get to message you and be like, Julia, did you include this because of this?
And the answer is usually yes. So.
Yeah. Well, I thought if you wanted to pause for a minute, I don't have my glasses on, which is why I'm squinting. If you wanted to have a look and see if there were any questions that anyone had or anything that anyone brings up.
I would love that. Yeah, that would be a lot. Have you got glasses now? There we go.
Should just keep them on. Let's see.
So in the meantime, I'm going to dance like this, and then also remind people that they can purchase The Last Dance the Debutante. Some people may have actually grabbed this well before this release date. This is the funny thing about having a book that not only had a pushback release date, so it was originally supposed to come out December 7th, came out today in the US, but also the fact that when you send books as a publisher to booksellers before the holidays, sometimes they get there early, and sometimes booksellers just put them out. So it was really cute. I had a couple of people being like, "Oh, I had it under the Christmas tree." I was like, "That's really nice. I don't have them yet." So I have only held this book in my hand in its final form today.
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
It is what it is. This is the very minimal struggle of being an international author. So.
Right. So Iris Ann says that she felt the drama and pictured the dresses. You and I are both very amateur sewists, and the dresses were like,
I mean, you're an amateur sewist. I literally have never threaded my machine because I got it the other day, and I still am waiting for supplies to come. So one day I might make my clothes, but I'm not sure I'm ever going to be able to make that. So
her sewing her dresses is just, it's the coolest thing. I know it's not like the done thing to do, but it was very cool. And she was tired by the endless rounds of parties, which is, I was like, I was tired reading some of that when they're like hopping from party to party every night. Now I'm an introvert, but ooh,
Yeah, exactly. It's just, it sounds like a lot, doesn't it?
yeah, it's maybe too much, but maybe I'm just a big wimp. So Susan says that your descriptions of competition versus friendship in the girls in the story is absolutely spot on.
Oh,
Although she wasn't a debutante back in the day, memories of mean girl culture and cliques kept flooding back, and she was really happy that Lily found her true friends, which is really nice. I was too, with the imperfects, which is what they call themselves. Just,
gotta have a group name.
yeah, definitely.
Well, I've always loved writing about female friendship, and I think that is one of the big threads that you're going to get if you pick up any of my books, regardless if it's this one or any of the others. And I just there's such important relationships in my life, and so I think
Mhm.
it's natural to populate books with them as well. But I think relationships between women are fascinating, and,
Mhm.
and one of those things that doesn't necessarily get looked at or written about as often as I would have expected, because again, it's fodder for a lot of really interesting stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, she's curious also if either of us ever had sort of the ups and downs of the kind of girl world as teenagers, which I think we both have.
Yeah, I think it's natural that that happens. I think one of the things that's really interesting, and I've had it a few times in my life, whether it's sort of as I'm leaving high school, going to university, or leaving university and going to, live and work, and various transition points in my life where I've felt like, sometimes you realize that the relationships that you have are not necessarily um, the healthiest. And in some cases, people sort of grow out of their relationships with each other. Either it's because you realize you don't actually have all that much in common anymore, or
Yeah.
things happen in life. And I think one of the big ones for us, given the age we're in, is people get married, people have kids, people's priorities change, people's time commitments change.
Mhm.
So again, I think that's kind of interesting to look at, and sort of how that affects a character.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I feel like when you're in sort of this incredibly wild world where there's so many expectations and there are people pushing you one way or another and there's so much pressure, you can kind of be tempted to just sort of like glomp onto someone, and
Yes.
maybe the initial reaction isn't necessarily the best one. And especially as you're going through this season and just the pressure keeps mounting, you're tired because, as we've established, it sounds exhausting. I imagine that it must have been, it would strain the best of friendships, but
Yeah,
especially new friendships. I mean,
definitely.
yeah.
Definitely.
um, let's have a look. I'm not very good at this whole scrolling through the comment thing, so
It's-
my apologies if I'm being
If
a
you
little
have to
bit
scroll,
slow.
it's a good sign. So
Yeah. Anissa wants to know, who was the toughest character to write and why? That's a really good question.
I think it was Leanna. I think she is, like I said, she's complicated, and I didn't want to paint her as just one thing, but wanted to convey a sense that she was complex. And again, I want to be careful and make sure that anybody who hasn't read it has a chance to take a look at the book and with fresh eyes. And but I thought she was particularly interesting. And I think the other character that was difficult in particular was Lily's mother. Actually, she's
Another complicated woman.
she's a sad woman, but
Mhm.
she has her reasons. She's a widow. Her life dramatically changed. The money in her life dramatically changed when her husband died. She wasn't there when he died, and that's really painful to her. And she makes decisions that have a really large impact on Lily's life.
Yeah.
And Lily doesn't fully understand why she makes them at the beginning of the book.
Mhm.
But more and more gets revealed, and I hope people feel a complicated way about her mother, because I
Yeah.
think she is a complicated character.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and sort of their way of, it's not quite butting heads because that sounds much more aggressive than it actually is, but the way that, you know, Lily is the daughter of people who maybe grew up a certain way and had certain expectations, and she's basically told to sit down, be quiet, and listen to what I have to say. But she doesn't get any explanation, and she is like part of a generation that's beginning to maybe question the authority of their parents more and more, and that kind of like creates that tension, and they butt heads quite a lot. It's really interesting to see that relationship and that sort of part of their relationship change.
Yeah, I also, it's funny, Lily was much more aggressive in the first draft of that book. Also, there's no grandmother character, who is a really central part of the book and a central part of why things happen. So I think, that was essential in getting her in there, and why she does certain things and how that changes the narrative for people. But I also mellowed Lily out a little bit and made her own reactions a bit more complex, because I felt like, really, when it came down to it, the problem between Lily and her mother was that she felt that her mother hadn't earned the right to make decisions for her, because she hadn't been a presence in her life for a very long time.
Yeah.
That's a thing that comes on throughout the book. It's not necessarily, you hope as an author, especially an author of the types of books that I write, where they're very character driven, you hope that a character starts at one place, and maybe a lot of characters in the book start at one place and they reach the place. You want to see them go through a journey.
Yeah, there's a lot of character arcs happening.
Yeah, building these things in so that you can actually see that happening as a reader is thing number one. And usually, if things aren't working between the first draft and the edits, that's a lot of what gets worked on.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, speaking of kind of the edits and the sort of the background, I've just lost it. There was a question about the cover, if you had any input on the cover, and if this was your original title.
No, it was not. The story behind that. So the cover is beautiful, and I absolutely love it. And it's beautiful because I had nothing to do with it. So I am not a visual arts person. I'm not a graphic design person. And I think that the art department does an amazing job. The art department at Gallery at Simon & Schuster does an amazing job interpreting the era and the story, and really evoking a feeling with the book that I'm writing. So basically, they get a brief from me and from my editor, and then they go off, and I don't see all the draft versions. I see what they suggest the final version should be, and then we tweak from there. So this was essentially done and dusted straight away. It was beautiful, and I love it. And I love the fact that it doesn't look like a lot of things that are out there in the market right now, and it has that sort of almost illustrated sense to it. When it comes to the title, I actually originally had, I wish that you could see, but her name is, she's in the bees. So, so unfortunately she's too high up. But Georgie Ballock, who I actually interviewed for Ask an Author, after I realized that she had the title The Last Debutante, which was the title that I was pitching, but she had, her book came out in August, I think it was. And my book was coming out at the time in December, and obviously subsequently in January. And she who publishes first wins. But I sent her an email, and I sent my editor an email and said, I think we need to change the title. And we went through a lot of rounds of, what should the title be, and threw out a lot of things. And ultimately, for various reasons, there is a sort of a final dance in this book, to say, not too much. But I liked the sort of evocative nature of The Last Dance of the Debutante. I've also had a lot of books with very long titles, The Last Garden of England and The Whispers of War and The Light Over London. So having it sort of be in the same parallel structure was kind of nice. But I actually emailed Georgie and I said, funny story. So my title was going to be your title. Do you want to go ahead and do an Ask an Author? And, we talk about debutantes together, and it was really fun. She's writing about a different era. She's writing about a different debutante. It's the niece of the Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, and
interesting.
the last season before Britain goes to war. So it's a very tense time. And I had a fabulous time, but it did make me laugh that I looked at it and I went, oh no. So
it's a small panic moment, but very easy to
in the end. And these things happen in publishing. They just do.
Yeah, exactly. Denise, by the way, was the one with the book under the Christmas tree, which is very sweet.
Oh, wonderful. I'm very
uh,
glad.
she's Canadian, so she got to purchase it early,
Excellent.
which makes us all quite jealous. um, so Mark asks, other than your fabulous tiara,
Thank
did you
you.
get a chance to wear or see any of the Fab Deb fashion while you were researching?
No, and I wish I had. So I'm in London, as you know, and as a lot of people watching will know. I live in London despite the accent. Uh, and the V&A is very close by, the Victoria and Albert Museum, which really specializes um, in museum exhibitions on costume and design and fashion.
It's so cool.
And they will absolutely work with you if you're researching something and you approach them. But unfortunately, it was the middle of the pandemic and nobody was able to get into anywhere when I was writing this book. It really was the early stages of Britain being in lockdown and then coming out of lockdown, but things still being difficult. So I did a lot of looking at dresses. I know, really, really difficult. I
Oh,
did
I know. What a hard research day that would have been.
exactly. I did a lot of looking at dresses online and, looking at old issues of magazines like this. And, there are entire fashion spreads that, for Casablanca, the Caribbean Capri. So it's all resort wear and things like that. So
That's
you get
amazing.
a sense of, what women would have been wearing at the time. And my friend, who used to be my neighbor, she has her mother was a debutante in 1964. So she wasn't
Hmm.
to the queen, but she was one of the girls who still did the season before the season really petered out. And she sent with her daughter the scrapbook that she kept of her debutante days, including
That's amazing.
photographs. So even though the fashion was a little bit different then, I got to get a sense of what the girls would have looked like, what the
Mhm.
parties would have looked like, because there were sort of wide shots from her coming out ball at the Ritz, very fabulous,
Yeah.
and all sorts of elements that ended up working their way into the book.
Mhm. That's really cool.
Yeah, it was fun. It was really fun. Unfortunately, she wouldn't let me take any photos and reproduce it, but it's in my head. So
You got to see it. Yeah, exactly. All the knowledge is up here.
yes.
So Mindy would like to know what sort of she's asked I believe where I live. I also live in the UK. I'm in Oxford, so I'm not too far away. Just a little hour's train ride.
It's great.
But she wants to know what kind of books we grew up loving, because her love for historical fiction started many years ago with Victoria Holt and Barbara Cartland.
Okay, excellent question. So I think I remember the first, well, there are a couple of stages of loving historical fiction, but again, as both of us mentioned, we grew up in a family of readers, and so we've always been reading. When I was a girl, the Dear America series was a big thing. So if you remember these,
Yes.
yeah, these were sort of girls' diaries from significant periods of time in history. So I remember very well the George Washington Valley Forge diary, and then there were
Mhm.
various other ones, Civil War, World War I, World War II, the San Francisco earthquake, I think, was one. So I loved those.
They were
But
great. Yeah.
sort of more adult historical fiction that I remember reading was Jean, and I'm sorry if I get the name wrong, Jean Pleiades
Jean
Catherine
Plady. Yeah.
Medici series. And then there was another series that she did as well. And mom remembered reading those as a girl. So it was all sort of this perpetuating cycle. But I think I can say for both of us, we both have always been big historical fiction readers, and big mystery readers too. Because again, our mother's a big mystery reader.
Mhm.
Dad's always been a big history reader, so that's all kind of converged. And then you went off into sci-fi and fantasy,
Fantasyland. Yeah.
and I went off into romance. And so both
Yeah.
of us also have sort of our additional genres, and I've always loved historical romance.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a nice combination of a lot of different things.
Yeah. Well, I read everything that you read because I have always had a bad case of younger sibling syndrome, where I've just always thought you were the coolest person, so I did do everything that you did. So I read a lot of it's true. So I read a lot of sort of the historical romances that you picked up.
Yes.
And I read a lot of kind of historical fiction, things like that. The Dear America books were fabulous, but there was a spin-off that was Dear America Royal Diaries. So they did one for Cleopatra, which was fabulous because she had a leopard
Oh,
with her on the cover. And they did Marie Antoinette as well. And then I
I
wrote
never
a history paper on her in the 7th grade.
Very nice. I never read those. Well, I like the idea that little things like that eventually end up sort of having a big impact that you would never have guessed.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and it's cute because, like, as you say, I'm sci-fi and fantasy and have started going into the horror genre as well, which is a fun new turn. But I think despite the fact that we all read quite different things, we all in some way, there's always something that we can enjoy from each other. So for example, I mean, the Lord of the Rings movies just like knocked me off my socks at the age of like 11 or however old I
And I
was.
read, yeah, I
And
read those as well.
yeah, you read them, and then mom turned out to have been a big fan when she was in college, and she read them. So like she lent them to me, and I've just lent our dad one of my very political low fantasy books that I love so much, and we mix it up a lot, which is very nice, even though we do have quite different tastes in books.
We do, but I can actually see in my background right now, there are a couple books that we read as a family
Oh
last year.
yeah,
So The Appeal by Janice Hallett, which I've been recommending all over the place. And then
great.
that's Spine of Malibu Rising, also the UK edition of it, which we all read as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's funny how certain recommendations have a way of popping up in other people's lists as well.
Yeah, definitely. And then we can force our recommendations on each other. Your poor partner, he didn't get bullied into reading Malibu Rising, but we all read Malibu Rising, then he read it and he did enjoy it, but we were all kind of like,
Poor thing. He
it was
enjoyed
great.
it though, so
Yeah, yeah, it was great.
it's all good.
Let's see, scrolling through for some more.
I have to say, I really like your tiara.
Thank you. So this is actually my husband bought it for me. It was my 2020, my birthday is canceled because of the pandemic tiara that came with a sash that had a foul word on it. So I'm not going to say what it was. But it was for my birthday because my birthday was in June, which was like the middle of lockdowns, and I was sad.
Yeah.
So it's pretty fabulous, but that's because it was carrying the burden of my canceled
Well,
birthday.
and I was gonna say you are taller than me, so it makes sense that you would have the taller tiara.
That's true. Yeah. Younger sister, but taller. Which I've always been like, yes. Uh doo, 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 doo. Ooh, what are your favorite genres to read? And can you recommend any current books that you're reading right now?
Well, so all the genres I mentioned, and I should give a particular shout out to historical mystery, which I love reading as well.
Mhm.
Surprise, surprise, I'm combining two of my favorite things into one. I'm pulling up my Goodreads list because I'm one of those people who you ask me what I like, and the moment you do, I don't
Gone.
remember any books ever.
Yep, yep,
So
yep.
I am currently reading a historical nonfiction book that you gave me for Christmas, actually, called
Yes.
Stars and Spies, and it's all about the connection between espionage and the entertainment industry. It's
Mhm.
fascinating, and I just got into World War One, so things are getting really relevant to my research
Yeah.
interests, which is great. But it's really a lot of fun. So I'm reading that right now. Let's pull up what I read this last year. So I really thought Meg Waite Clayton's The Postmistress of Paris was excellent.
I remember you reading that.
It was the last Ask an Author. So those of you who don't know, I do a series of interviews called Ask an Author, and they are bringing an author on to talk about their book, talk about the writing process, and then answer reader questions. And so she was a wonderful interview, and I really loved that book. I thought it was fabulous. I also read recently The Appeal by Janice Hallett, which is an epistolary.
Distillery.
Justine thinks it's funny that I have trouble saying that word. So it's an epistolary novel told through emails, text messages, various other things, and it's essentially a murder mystery.
Mhm.
And I thought it was great. And I think her new book comes out very soon here in the UK.
I think it was spring, but they've actually brought it forward because it's coming out this month, I think. I'm really excited.
It's is pretty exciting.
Mm.
And then so a couple of things to look out for in the future, because one of the nice things about being an author is I get advanced copies of things sometimes. So Genevieve Graham's book Bluebird is really interesting. So it starts kind of World War One, a Canadian nurse in a battlefield hospital. She treats a man who is a tunneler. So one of the people who was charged with tunneling under German trenches and being part of the warfare under the ground, and they get separated because he gets sent back to the battlefield, and she keeps on doing her work. And when they're sort of brought back together again, it's in 1920s Prohibition Canada. And I had no idea that parts of Canada also had Prohibition enacted, and it looked a little different than the United States. But one of the things that happened, of course, is if you take alcohol away from people, they will find a way to find it. And one of the things that started happening, and one of the characters is involved in, is the rum running trade. So, distilling whiskey illegally and running it over the Detroit River into the United States. And so it's this story that sort of catches them up in all the things that are going on in Prohibition. So I loved that. I thought it was fabulous. And that comes out in the early spring, I believe. And then The Wedding Veil by Christy Woodson Harvey. I've been talking about this book all over the place. It's a dual timeline book. And it is a young woman who something happens and her wedding doesn't go forward. And she kind of goes on a journey of discovering herself. Very witty, very fun. And she may or may not have a very significant wedding veil in her family that may or may not be connected to the Vanderbilts. So I think
exciting.
That's a fun one that I think people are going to really enjoy as well. So it's a good reading year coming up, and I've got a stack of books from Christmas to read as well. So
yeah, excellent. Well, I'm going to co-opt that and assume that this was asked to me as well. I have no idea.
Please do. What do you love if not a book recommendation?
But saying that, I also need to pull up my Goodreads because I can't remember. Unfortunately, the last book that I read was not my favorite, so I'm not going to bring it up, which is disappointing because I love the author, but it just wasn't, I think, his best. It's loading very slowly, though. So I read The Last Garden in England by Julia Kelly. I've never heard of that before.
Very shameless plug.
That's true. It's right there. So I did read sort of, I guess, similar-ish. It's hard not to draw the comparison to The Appeal. I read The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman.
Yes, which I also have somewhere on my shelf too. And I also
which was a good recommendation from our dad, actually, because he read it and then read the second one and then was like, guys, can you read this, please? I want to talk about it. That was really fun. It's a book about it basically takes place in a retirement village in the UK. And there's this group of the elderly residents who live there who are all friends, and they have something called the Thursday Murder Club, where they meet up and they kind of like look back at old unsolved crimes, just kind of for fun, to see if they can solve them. But then a murder actually happens and they decide they're going to help the police, whether the police want their help or not. And it's really, I don't think I've ever had a book whip me so fast from like laughing so hard to just weeping so fast.
Parts of it are very moving.
Yeah, there's I've talked about it a million times to you specifically, and I won't say what it is because it's just gonna make me burst into tears. But there's a couple of parts where they're talking about like their friends who have passed away and stuff. It's so sad.
Really good. And you, I think for Christmas, got the second one, The Man Who Died Twice, which I haven't read yet.
Yeah, I did. It's in the other room because it didn't fit on this set of bookshelves. But I'm really looking forward to that. It takes place a couple of weeks after the first one. I'm having a scroll to see if there's anything that won't make me sound too mad, because I've been reading a lot of horror books lately.
A lot of sort of retellings of 80s slasher films in kind of snarky, interesting ways.
Definitely, yeah. But there is one good one that I actually recommended to Mum while we were book shopping, and she just went yoink, and she decided to get it. It's called The Haunting Season, which is a collection of short stories in an anthology from a bunch of amazing modern Gothic, like historical Gothic writers, like Laura Purcell.
I love historical Gothic. It's so interesting.
Yeah, it's really good. So like Laura Purcell, Kieran Millwood Hargreaves, all these amazing, I think they're exclusively British historical kind of gothic spooky writers. It's so good, and it's like the perfect thing for winter because it's like it's chilling. You can pile
Yeah,
yourself
no,
under a duvet.
it's the right time. And you don't want to read Gothic when it's bright and sunny and
No,
really warm outside, do you? Maybe you
the
do.
wind's got to be howling. Come on.
It was howling today.
So this is a fun question, then we'll bring it back to your book, I promise. I'm having fun and I'm in control.
And you said you might have the little sister syndrome, but you might also have the little sister wants her way syndrome.
Yes, maybe a little bit.
Just a little, in a good way.
In a good way, yeah, yeah. How did you both end up in the UK?
So I'm really curious about how you answer this. So my answer is the short version is my mother's British, my father's American. We were born and raised in Los Angeles, and we actually, fun fact, used to live 6 blocks from each other in New York City.
I think
So
four, yeah.
yeah, we both left Los Angeles for reasons of going to school and ended up as women in our early 20s living in New York. And so the version of the story that I give is that my parents moved over for my dad's job. They've since retired here. My sister moved over because she met a handsome Scotsman while she was traveling. And ended up, I know she met a man, ended up going to graduate school in Scotland and also moving to be with him. And they since have gotten married. And when you sort of didn't know, I think, that you were about to get engaged. And
everyone knew but me.
And I sort of saw the writing on the wall at my job, and I thought, I'd like to leave journalism because I wasn't enjoying it anymore. And I thought, what better thing to do than blow up your entire life and have everything change. So I left the business. I moved not just cities, but countries. And I showed up in the UK with a few suitcases and a lot of books to write. And that's basically how I ended up settled in the UK. And now, now my partner's here and I own a flat, and I'm thinking about getting a dog. Like, just things have happened in the last few years. It's
So
been
excited for that dog. I'm so excited.
I'm so excited too. So what's your version of that story? Is it pretty similar or?
So my husband has been helping me out because I'm terrible at questions. He's been sending me questions, and he sent this one, and he said, "Tell the story of how I whisked you off your feet," which is great.
He's confident, that one.
Oh yeah, it's a very long story, but the most abbreviated version is kind of like a Hallmark movie. I, disenchanted New Yorker, decide that I'm going to go on holiday with my friends.
You're right.
I know, right? To the UK. I find out that after several months after this trip is booked, our parents are moving to the UK. So I was like, I want out of New York. I was thinking about moving back to Los Angeles to be closer to them. Why not make this trip a where does Justine want to live trip? Great. We went to Dublin, which is not part of the UK, but we went to Dublin, we went to Edinburgh, London, and Paris. And in Edinburgh, I met this gentleman, tall, good head of hair.
Charming,
yeah, I guess.
Yes,
very charming, very lovely.
He's very upset that we decided to talk about him and not glow about him.
I know, right? I can hear him giggling from the other room. And we swapped information, and we would write each other one extremely long Facebook message a day until we decided we were at the point where we could write more than one message a day. And then kind of stayed in touch. He came to visit me. He came down very bravely on the overnight bus from Edinburgh to London on Boxing Day to meet the family.
Very weird.
Yeah, he was real loopy, but very charming. And I had decided at that point, if I wanted to move to the UK, I better have a plan, as like a PowerPoint to show my parents it's not just a man. There's other reasons. So I applied to graduate school. I got in. I moved over with my very grumpy cat, who we've assured is asleep and not going to be interrupting this call. And yeah, I lived in Edinburgh for a year. We moved down here for work, and now we're married and have 2 very, very destructive cats, and life is good.
And we ended up all in the same country, which has been wonderful.
It's really convenient to not have to do math to call your parents because they were in a different time zone because we were in New York and they were in Los Angeles. So we'd have to be like, all right, what time is it? -3. Okay, I can call them. They'll be awake.
Exactly. Or when they moved to London and it was like, oh, that's even worse.
Yeah, exactly.
So no, it is funny because I remember very clearly having the conversation with you, are we both trying to move back to Los Angeles? And then our parents got on a video call with us and said, how would you feel about the whole family going to London for the holidays instead of Los Angeles? And, we would live in London. And I just thought, I want to live in
Cross Los Angeles, right in London.
I want to live in London. So
Sounds great.
That was what ended up happening. So we don't live in
Yeah.
the same place, but we're close. We're a close family. And so it's nice finally being able to see each other without having to get on a plane.
Yeah, exactly. Not having to do math to call each other, not getting on a plane. It's very nice.
Exactly.
Okay, so I did promise we'd get back to your book for a couple more questions. I really, really like this one. If you could choose a dress for the Deb ball, what color would you pick?
So my favorite color is red, and that would not be allowed.
It's way too saucy for a Deb ball, Julia.
So I put in, talking about things that you research and put in. One of the former debutantes I spoke to mentioned that she had a red dress, I think made for her actually, and her mother would not let her wear that as a debutante. So that became an after she was a debutante. So after her season and after the year was done, because red was just too saucy. So yeah, I probably would have ended up in light blue. I don't look great in pink. I think it washes me out, but yeah, that
Good
might.
in jewel tones.
Yeah, yeah.
Jewel tones.
I love a jewel tone. So
Mm,
how about
yeah.
you? What color would you do?
Ooh, I mean, yellow is my favorite color, so I'd probably just stick to yellow and just be the.
There's a yellow dress in the book.
That's true.
A knife-beaded yellow dress. So there you go.
I did love, speaking of things you're not allowed to wear as a debutante, one of the characters, one of the friends whose grandmother is very strict, she gets like a little like green pillbox hat, and her grandmother is going to be absolutely like just incensed by this hat, so she has to leave it at her friend's house, which I thought was quite funny.
It's the equivalent of having a change of clothes in your handbag when you go out as a teenager. And I never did that though. But
I never did that, but I have friends who did. They would come and get changed at our house.
Yes, I actually do. I think.
So it's been about an hour, so I thought that we would maybe wrap up. I'm sure Julia would be more than happy to answer questions later on. I think there's some questions about book plates and things like that.
Yes, yeah. I'm working on those. They supposedly are somewhere in transit, so I'm hoping to be able to get book plates to people.
Excellent. So just as a last question to kind of wrap things up, because I am nosy and I'm sure a lot of people are very curious, what are you working on now? What's your next book going to be? Can you tell us?
I can,
Okay.
but I can actually tell you about a couple of things. So the big thing that I can talk about most readily, because it's written, is untitled still. I've been calling it Return to Me, My Love, but it may, as we saw with The Last Dance, the Debutante, the title may change. I think I've had no books make it through with the title that I pitched the book as. So everything has always changed, and that's for marketing reasons, sale reasons. Sometimes it just doesn't work. So anyway, it's called Return to Me, My Love, and it's about you meet a young woman on her wedding day, and you realize very quickly that it's a wedding under not as happy circumstances as it could be. She's pregnant. This is the 1930s in Liverpool, and she is a young Catholic girl, and her family is forcing her to marry a young man who is Jewish. So two different religions in a very religious city, and a very religiously divided city. And that's actually based on lifted from a true story from our family about a distant relative. And they are married and then immediately separated. Something happens and he goes off and she doesn't see him again. So when we meet her again, she has a young daughter, war has been declared, and she has to choose to keep her daughter with her or evacuate her daughter. Meanwhile, he is in America, working as
Mhm.
a jazz musician, and there's a lot of guilt that he's been holding because of the decision that he made on their wedding day. So he actually goes back to England and enlists in the RAF. And these two people are sort of, on very different paths, but what ends up bringing them back together and everything converging is their daughter.
Mhm.
And something happens during the war, and 20 years after the war, they're brought back together to figure out what happened to their daughter, and ultimately what could potentially happen between the two of them as well. So I'm getting shorter at describing that book as I have to
Excellent.
do it more and more, but I'm still not quite there yet. So I hope you guys are still with me. But that book is slated to be my winter release my next winter release. And then the contract signed, so I think I can talk about this. Should I talk about?
Yes, talk about it. Talk about it.
I
We can
haven't
edit this out somehow if you're publishing it.
it's live, Justine. It's live. So I haven't talked about this anywhere. So this is really exciting. But the contract is signed. So I am moving into continuing to do historical fiction as I have been doing with these, very character-driven stories about women. But I'm also doing something really exciting. So I mentioned that I love historical mystery. So I'm actually starting a historical mystery series also. And right now, the main character is called Evelyn Redfern. Again, we'll see, subject to change. We'll see if she continues to be Evelyn Redfern. But she is a young woman who is in World War II, working in a munitions factory. She has a sort of scandalous past through her parents. She is the daughter at the center of a really famous custody battle, and this is her, grown up. So she's sort of dealing with that reputation, and a mysterious person from her father's past comes up and offers her a job in Winston Churchill's cabinet war rooms. So she takes the job, and there is subsequently a murder in the cabinet war rooms, and that kicks off her career as an amateur detective, which is perfect because she herself was previously, she has throughout her life loved murder mysteries, and particularly, the golden age mysteries that would have been being published then. So it's hopefully drawing on some familiar names from any mystery readers. It's keeping me in sort of World War II Britain, which I love. And it's a bit different for me. It's written so far, again, because this is very new, written in first person. It's a mystery series, so a little bit of a different focus. And I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to be really fun. And that also doesn't have a title. So
Yes.
we're batting 0 for 2 on this, but it will be really fun. And I literally started writing that today. So yeah, so
that.
so this is something the deal announcement will be announced or has been announced. And so, yeah, that's what's coming up for me as well. So people can kind of keep an eye. If you go to my website, which is juliakellywrites.com, there's a button up at the top, I think right-hand corner, or if you scroll down on the homepage, you'll see it too. And there's a newsletter sign up, and all as developments happen and titles are solidified and book covers come out, all of that will be available through the newsletter, which I send frequently. So yeah.
It's very exciting. I'm really excited for the mysteries.
I am too.
Plus, it means you get to read loads of Golden Age mysteries.
Which is the other thing that I've been doing.
Yeah. So terrible, difficult research, Julia.
Very difficult to sit there and read, Niall Marsh and Agatha Christie and Margaret Allingham and all of these, Dorothy L. Sayers, all these wonderful mystery writers. So
well, that's very exciting. I think we can all probably very confidently say that we're really looking forward to your new books. But Last Dance the Debutante is out today in the US.
Yes, it is. It is.
Beautiful hardcover. Really, really beautiful hardcover.
And the audiobook and the ebook are also out today, which is really exciting too.
So yeah, I think that's the end of the launch party. This has been really fun. Thanks for asking me to do this with you.
Of course, and thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it. I've got some wonderful, wonderful people following along on Facebook, and I always appreciate it. And I appreciate you coming and talking to me. This has been great. I don't know why we haven't done this before.
I know, it's kind of silly actually that we haven't done this before.
But maybe I'll be able to persuade Justine again to to interview me for a launch day. But
maybe.
Thank you again. I really appreciate it.
And again, if you have any more questions, go ahead and drop them in the comments. I'm sure Julia will be getting back to you guys over the
Yes.
next couple of days.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you guys. Happy reading. I really enjoy it. And thank you, Justine.
Oh, you're very welcome.